South African Airways. Could you tell us your vision is for bringing us together for better mobility in Africa? And then can you share with us some of the investment plans you may have?
Okay, thank you. I think having lived in Asia for some time, so I'm used in being called various names. Yeah. So I guess after 2 glasses of red wine, you'll be able to pronounce my name. Yeah. What I want to do, I'll respond to your question, but I think it's important for me, to actually share with you the investments that we've made in Asia in terms of linking Asia with Africa. I mean, because having lived here for some time now, I'm very humbled by the enthusiasm that Asian investors have on Africa. And I actually want to share with you the links between Africa and, Asia, and how we've structured our investment as South African Airways in Asia. I mean, just if you take, just the map of Asia, I mean, there's North Asia that you have, then you've got Southeast Asia, and in North Asia, we have developed a hub, which is in Hong Kong. And I must know, maybe a number of you, maybe we have traveled to here, maybe they have either used, our flights, via Hong Kong. Hong Kong is basically the hub for North Asia. That covers Japan, where we are, which is one of the biggest, investors. I'm quite surprised that you've got few Japanese, here, because we know from our own networks, as South African Airways, that there's a lot of Japanese that are investing in Africa. Hence, we have Hong Kong as a hub and linking Hong Kong with Tokyo, and we've got a partnership with ANA, to feed, into Africa. And a number of countries that are have interest in Africa, in North Asia, I mean, that would be Japan in ranking. You have South, Korea. I don't want to talk about the sensitive issues that are happening at the moment, but you also have, Taiwan, and the Philippines. And we're actually linking those countries via Hong Kong with key, countries that I will mention in Africa, where we've actually seen a lot of trade flows and business activity that is happening between the North Asia, and those African countries. Then I will also touch base, on southern China. I mean, there's quite a lot of interest that we have picked up in terms of trade activity that is happening between southern China and Africa. I will mention few of the places in southern China. If you take Guangzhou, you take Shenzhen, there's quite a lot of trade flows that are happening between southern China and Africa. And just as an example, you've got over 200,000 Africans who are traveling between southern China and Africa. And we've actually positioned our operations in such a way that we're able to facilitate that movement of Africans through our Hong Kong hub to Africa. Then I'll also talk more about the Beijing. You might have aware that we have actually launched the Beijing operations beginning of this year. And it's amazing how the trade and the business activity, that is happening between now northern China, and Africa. I mean, the biggest markets that we've invested in Africa that we've seen those trade flows that are happening, I'll mention Angola, for example. I mean, as you know, that there's, oil, in Angola, and Angola is diversifying, its, manufacturing, industrial capacity. So there is a lot of investment and travel that we've seen, business and trade between northern China and Africa. I mean, if you take, for example, the map of China, we have northern China and we have established Beijing as a hub, to actually, facilitate trade and flows between northern China and Africa. And you look at the eastern China again through Hong Kong and Africa, and southern China that I've mentioned. And I mean, we know the number of countries where we as SAA have operations in Africa that are quite interest from the Chinese investors. That will be Ghana, I mean, that will be South Africa, of course. Then it will be Nigeria, and Kenya. And we have made sure that we've got those investments and the infrastructure that we have for transportation linking, China with those particular countries. Just the last two that I want to mention also, I mean, in India, I mean, that's also where we actually picked up a lot of interest in terms of investments from India, to Africa. And we've actually linked East Africa, which is of much interest, to India. Currently, as it speaks, I mean, we have about 24 operations in Africa as South African Airways. And out of those 24 operations in Africa, we've actually added, I think, about 5, operations in Africa, which actually includes, I mean, Burundi, Rwanda, in Abidjan. And there are other possible investments that we're actually, exploring now, subject to shareholder, approvals. That includes Southern Sudan. Just in closing, I mean, what important trend that we're picking up also, which informs our investment, is also on the cargo, because that cargo is quite very important. And we've seen now Japan and China topping, cargo flows, into Africa, and which requires more capacity, and we're evaluating, the capacity that we have out of this market to be able to capture, those trade flows. Yeah, that's basically me. Thank you.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.